Despite everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart. I simply can't build up my hopes on a foundation consisting of confusion, misery, and death. I see the world gradually being turned into a wilderness. I hear the ever-approaching thunder which will destroy us too. I can feel the sufferings of millions, and yet if I look up into the heavens, I think that it will all come right, that this cruelty too will end, and that peace and tranquility will return again. This haunting quote by diarist Anne Frank, a teenage girl in hiding from the Nazis during the German occupation of the Netherlands, expresses the terrifying and cruel events that would tragically soon follow her, her family, and friends. Anne's diary is the most famous recording of the key events that would later be named the Holocaust, a series of mass murders of European Jews who were targeted by the Nazis because of their ideology and prejudice. The story of the Holocaust era began with the political rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party in January 1933. The Nazi Party was founded in 1919 by a locksmith named Anton Drexler, but he didn't stay in power for long as a soldier named Private Adolf Hitler took over the party the following year. Once he took over, Hitler made changes to the party and he introduced a 25-point program to attract more support for the party, mainly for the working class. Around that time, Germany was in a terrible political state. The First World War had left them in financial debt and having to pay for compensation for war damage. It was agreed in the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 that Germany had to give money to Allied countries, including Great Britain and France. But because of the debt, Germany was forced to make an international agreement with the United States to borrow loans of money to carry on their payments. This was known as the Dawes Plan. Germany also lost territories and gave up all of its overseas colonies. Citizens were living in poor economic conditions. Rates for unemployment were growing in great numbers, and there was political instability. When the Great Depression hit in 1929, the United States were unable to loan Germany any more money. As a result, Germany suffered more than any other nation in the world. Having had enough, people were turning their support to the Nazi Party, and quickly the party increased its membership, which would soon lead them to the Reichstag building, the seat of German political power. In 1932, an election was held in Germany and the Nazi Party came out victorious. Because of the results, Hitler was offered the position of Vice-Chancellor in a coalition with the von Papen and von Schleicher. Hitler had refused the position because of the political weakness of the German government at the time. In the summer of 1933, Hitler, who was in power and leading the German government by himself, declared the Nazi Party to be the only political party in Germany. In 1934, Hitler took the titles of Führer, Chancellor, and Commander-in-Chief of the Army, all while continuing to be the leader of the Nazi Party. Not long after coming into power, the Nazis began immediately to exclude one group of citizens from German economic, political, social, and cultural life. This group would be Jewish citizens who were beginning to be treated like vermin, with the party believing that they were doing harm towards Germany. Antisemitism was a number one priority to the Nazis, for they believed that the Jews were responsible for Germany's social, economical, political, and cultural problems for many reasons, from the country's defeat in the First World War to the Great Depression. Although these weren't the first cases of anti-Semitism against Jews, there were no mass murder cases reported at the time. Many Jewish citizens and families were living in fear, and they wanted to move away from Germany for protection. Many families travelled to other countries like the Netherlands, Great Britain, and the United States. While some moved out of Germany, other Jewish citizens had to face new regulations that would exclude them from society. Beginning in the autumn of 1935, the Nazi regime had passed the Nuremberg race laws, which placed regulations that Jews had to follow. These included new parents having to follow a government-approved list for naming their babies and adding first names for young people, men and women for those who don't have a name from the list, Israel for men and Sarah for women. Other regulations include vandalizing German Jewish passports by having stamps with the letter J inside them. In September 1941, German Jews were forced to wear a badge in the shape of the Star of David when in public. If some did not wear the badge, they would be detained or shot. German Jews would also lose their citizenship, and they were even banned from attending the 1936 Winter and Summer Olympic Games that were being hosted in Berlin. In 1938, there was a wave of violent protesting against Jews living in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and Czechoslovakia. After that, more laws were enforced that removed Jewish citizens from their social rights. These measures included German doctors having their licenses revoked and not being allowed to treat non-Jewish patients. Jewish children and students had to be barred from public schools and universities, and Jewish citizens were not allowed to visit public places like the cinema, swimming pools, and parks. But this wasn't enough for Adolf Hitler. He wanted to ensure that all Jews in Europe would be controlled under the Nazi regime if successful in an invasion. So, with the approval of the Nazi Party, the territorial expansion in other European countries began in 1938. Between then and 1941, the party had invaded Austria, Poland, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, France, Greece, and the Soviet Union. They also further extended their control on Europe when they made alliances with the governments of Italy, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and Slovakia. By 1942, Nazi Germany had controlled most of Europe and parts of North Africa. After invading them, the regime would also further extend harsher policies to Jewish citizens, which would begin the starting gun for the mass murder of millions of Jews. The regime would also encourage people to work in institutions and organizations that support the party. They would also encourage people to work in the Gestapo or to give information to catch Jews who were in hiding from the regime. Many Jews were burgled and were insulted in public. Between 1941 and 1942, Hitler began to carry the early stages of mass murders of European Jews following the invasion of the Soviet Union. This stage is known as the final solution. Following a secret meeting held by the chief of the security police, the final solution was passed to get rid of the policies and rules against European Jews by using genocide. During the final solution, there were two methods of mass murder that the Nazis carried out. The first method was mass shootings. The shootings would occur in villages, towns, and cities in broad daylight when Jewish citizens would be rounded up and taken to the outskirts of their homeland before they were forced to dig mass graves or pits for themselves before they were shot. These would be carried out in Einstazgruppens within the Soviet Union, which is now known as Ukraine, Belarus, and in the states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. In total, 1.5 million men, women, and children were shot in mass shootings, with the largest taking place in Kiev, Ukraine, at Belzec, where on the 29th of September 1941, over 33 million Jewish residents were killed. The second method was conducting gassing operations to allow Jewish citizens to suffocate inside mobile gas vans and killing centers, or known as concentration camps. And the gas that was used was either Treblinka, Belzec, Sobibor, and Zyklon B pellets. The pellets would contain carbon monoxide, a harmful chemical where it reduces the amount of oxygen that's transported in the bloodstream to critical organs. But the cruelest act that the Nazi regime have committed was stationing concentration camps. Before the Nazi regime, there was another country that first introduced concentration camps. Great Britain had over 100 camps during the Boer War where the British housed refugees and native Africans for slavery purposes for the Boers. At the end of the Boer War, over 27,000 people died. Moving forward to Nazi Germany, there were no plans for them, but it was believed that after Hitler came into power, that the system arose within the following months. The first record of a concentration camp in Germany is in March 1933, where a camp was set up in Nora. This became the Hermannschule Mittelschutzland, or Home School in Central Germany camp. However, the camp closed in October of the same year, and following the closure, the site would be used by the Luftwaffe for military training. By 1941, Nazi Germany would operate 23 camps, including the infamous Auschwitz. In Auschwitz, European Jews were treated like cattle and were forced to live in unbearable conditions. From the moment they would begin their journey to the camp, people would start their journey by being crammed into cattle wagons without windows, toilets, seats, or food. Once they arrived, they were sorted into groups. One could work in the camp and the other group would be immediately killed. However, some people would die in the cattle cars from exhaustion, suffocation, and dehydration, and some mothers would kill their own children to stop them from crying. When the cattle cars arrived in Auschwitz, the group who were to be killed were ordered to strip naked and told that they would need a shower before entering the camp. This made some people believe that they were going into the showers for delousing. Then the Jews would be sent to the chambers where they would be killed in less than 20 minutes. In one day, the gas chambers would kill 2,000 people every 3 hours. But the chambers were crammed, and after the gassing, some victims would still be standing, with mothers holding their babies that were black and blue from the gas. After death, German officials forced some remaining prisoners to assist in the killing process, before sorting through the belongings of victims and removing bodies from the gas chambers. Prisoners would have shaved women's hair, and they would have to check their teeth in case a gold tooth was to be removed from a corpse. But the prisoners wouldn't do the following tasks after that, because once the bodies were removed, special units would dispose of the corpses through mass burial in the cremations by burning the corpses in large ovens. However, in 1944, when the largest mass killings took place, the ovens couldn't keep up. To keep everything up, the officers had constructed massive cremation pits. When the corpses came out of the gas chambers, they would be thrown into the pits. Sometimes the Nazis didn't want to bother with the gas and made people jump in the pits alive. Near the end of the war, children aged 5 and under were pulled from the line and were either shot in the back of the neck or simply thrown in the ovens alive. In October 1944, a group of young Jewish males who were responsible for removing the corpses staged a revolt by assaulting their guards and demolishing a crematorium. Sadly, despite their protests, all of them were killed. Those who could work were forced to live in cramped and unhygienic conditions. Prisoners would sleep in either 3-tier wooden bunks which were close together, and each bunk had straw mattresses. They would live in dampness, and sometimes there would be foul smells of diarrhea on the mattresses. There was a water shortage for washing, and there were hardly any suitable sanitary facilities, and the camp was swarmed with vermin and rats. Their working days were long. They would begin work as early as 4:30 a.m. and would work for 11 hours a day, excluding Sundays and holidays. They would be in bed each night by 9 p.m. When they began working, people would be assigned to various labor jobs, including laying roads, erecting new blocks and buildings around the camp, working in factories producing chemicals, and digging drainage ditches. The pace of the work, small rations of food, and the abuse people would suffer increased the death rate day by day. At nightfall, prisoners would carry the corpses of the dead before receiving their evening meals, which was slices of bread. The regime would also use ghettos for mass murders. Ghettos were areas of either cities or towns where Jews were forced to live in overcrowded and unsanitary conditions. Prisoners in the ghettos received little food, and similar to concentration camps, diseases like typhus and tuberculosis would spread. Ghettos were often enclosed by building walls or other barriers which were built to prevent people from leaving. The ghettos were usually occupied in Poland, with the largest ghettos located in Warsaw and Lowitz. Other ghettos were established in other parts of Europe, including Hungary and possibly in the Soviet Union. In Poland, the ghettos were used long-term, whereas most lasted a few weeks or months. However, Lowitz lasted until 1944, when a group of Jews still worked and survived until the end of the war, but some families went extinct. Despite the conditions, some ghettos had schools, libraries, religious institutions, and communal welfare services. However, citizens would involve themselves in uprisings against the regime. One of the most famous ghetto uprisings occurred in Warsaw in 1943. In this uprising, the civilian population resisted German forces by refusing to assemble at collection points and burrowing in underground bunkers. Despite their revolt, around 42,000 Jews were deported to forced labor camps, including the Lublin concentration camp. Others were murdered in the Operation Harvest Festival, where there were 2-day shootings of prisoners for their crimes in the uprising. However, the Nazis didn't just murder Jews. The other groups of people they would murder were political opponents who were against the regime, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, people who were accused of habitable crimes like prostitution, drinking alcohol, etc., Soviet officials, and people who have a variety of disabilities. Disabled people would be examined in a T4 program where they would be taken to institutions where they were forcibly sterilized or gassed with carbon monoxide after being medically examined by experts. Once examined, children and adults were either killed by lethal injection, starvation, or in the gas chambers, which were disguised as shower rooms. In 1942, Allied powers, which included countries that weren't invaded, began bombing Germany to force the Nazi regime to surrender. Slowly, Germany lost control of the Soviet Union, North Africa, and Italy. By 1945, countries and camps were liberated, and divisions even landed on the beaches in Normandy, France, to defeat the regime. In April, Hitler committed suicide, and just 1 month later, the Holocaust was over when the Chief of Staff of the German Army signed the German Third Reich on the 7th of May 1945. The signing of the document brought an end to the Holocaust and the first half of World War II. The war wouldn't be over until the 2nd of September 1945, when Japan surrendered to the United States of America. However, the liberation didn't bring closure, for survivors had to face ongoing threats of violent anti-Semitism and displacement while they were trying to rebuild their lives in the aftermath. They would also have to go through the pain of losing their loved ones. Many were housed in the camps and would develop PTSD, and others were continuing to locate missing family members. It is now estimated that between 6 million Jews were murdered during the Holocaust. Today, schools in Germany have mandatory school trips to concentration camps every spring, but some visits would occur on the 27th of January, which is Holocaust Memorial Day. Each year, students in 9th grade or above visit as part of their class curriculum. With each trip, they would see, learn, and reflect on the events that had occurred. One former student went to interview a group of his school teachers to discuss further school trips. In one interview, a teacher gave this statement to explain why the trips are very important. It is most important to learn about the visits so that things like extremism won't happen again, and that we work against it. We shouldn't just follow others like blind sheep and stop things that we know are wrong. It's important to have a historical contact for them to know the seriousness and to have a differential image.